Shen, a ballad of Running Horse Creek, composed for Grandmaster Feng Changqing as he takes his army westward. Have you not seen, sir, Running Horse Creek flowing beside an ocean of snow, the vast desert stretching off, yellow as far as heaven? In the 9th month, at Wheel Terrace, the wind howls at night. The creek is full of broken stones as big as bushels. Blown on the wind, scattered, smaller stones fly everywhere. When the Tartar grass turned yellow, and their horses fat and sleek, from Gold Mountain their dust and smoke rose in the west. So the great general of Han leads his army west to meet them. The general wears his golden armor through the night. At midnight his men march, their spears clashing. The wind, like a knife, slashing their faces. Their horses' tails are full of snow, their sweat boiling like steam, then freezing into ice on the manes of these great chargers. As in your tent you draft a declaration, the ink freezing as you write. When they hear your words, then they will know terror, and dare not come to cross swords with you. We will wait at the west gate for word of your great victory. So here we encounter again Shen. We've already talked about a poem of his, climbing a tower with some of his friends. This one is of a totally different type. This heptasyllabic kushi is very representative of what has stereotypically become the style, the type of Shen's poems, which are generally poems about the frontier, about war, just as this poem is. The topic of this poem is war in the frontier, a military campaign by this Feng Changqing in the west against the Barbarians. And it's the first of 3 poems in this style contained in this anthology by Shen. All of them are about war, and the first 2, the one that we've just read and the one that we will read tomorrow, are about Feng Changqing and his campaigns. So who is Master Feng Changqing? He was a very important general during the Tang Dynasty. You could say he was a self-made man, as he came from a very humble background. He was quite successful in the western regions in fighting the barbarians, and he made quite a friendship with another general who was his first employer and protector. But in spite of all this success and these rewards in the fights against the barbarians, he ended up having or meeting a terrible end. So during the An Lushan rebellion, his troops tried to stop the rebels in the eastern capital. He failed, and he and his old patron were executed on the orders of the emperor for their failure. So sad end. Now this general, this Feng Changqing, had included, during a time, Shen was included among the people at his service, among the civil servants that were under his control. So we might imagine this poem being composed shortly before the An Lushan rebellion, which was when Shen went to the west in the entourage of Feng Changqing in this military campaign. So as we said, the topic of the poem is warfare. Remember, Chinese poetry very seldom makes direct praises of the soldiers, because war is a bit of a taboo topic in Chinese traditional culture. In the best of cases, it's seen as a necessary evil, and there's very seldom really epic poetry to be encountered in any Chinese poem. But this one gets quite close, although we can anticipate that one way in which it praises war without praising it is, in this poem, Feng Changqing is so effective and so impressive that he doesn't even need to fight to win the barbarians, refuse to fight with him because they're awed by his power. There might be a bit of rhetoric in this, but it might also be realistic, and it's a nice way of singing a war without casualties, in the style of Caesar's Veni Vidi Vici. What does get described in detail here is not the soldiers or their bravery, but the harshness of the natural environment. And we already encountered this in poems about the frontier. Remember, the northwestern lands, where the old borders of the Chinese Empire crossed into the Eurasian steppe, mark a geographical and climatological frontier, as well as a historical or political one. Central Asia is basically steppe land, not very fertile, with long, tall grasses and big deserts, deadly cold in winter, scorchingly hot in summer, and with harsh winds. So it's a desolate and almost alien landscape for the Chinese in its uniformity and in its extreme of temperature change. And this does get well represented in this poem. So let's take a look stanza by stanza. So the poem starts, this happens a lot with heptasyllabic gushi from what I can see. The poem starts with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It starts with a big line with more than 7 verses, with 8, 9, 10, which is the first line. It's a very, very, very big line. And then you have the typical heptasyllabic couplets. Have you not seen, sir, running Horse Creek, flowing beside an ocean of snow? The vast desert stretching off, yellow as far as heaven. So, we get the introduction, and in the introduction the poet Shen addresses himself directly to the general he is serving, and he's asking him a rhetorical question about the landscape, the alien landscape they are visiting. So here we have a river, which also appears in the title, Running Horse Creek, and it flows beside an ocean of snow, which I might imagine could be a lake, maybe a frozen lake. Others have translated this as the snowy seashore. And we get a vast desert as well, yellow as far as heaven. So vast images of coldness and harshness, a vast plain, the steppe, dry, yellowish, no life, no trees, extending all the way up to the horizon, and a river that flows beside an ocean of snow. So this river is flowing next to a frozen lake, perhaps, or perhaps a mountain, but anyway, a big expanse of frozen snow. That's not fresh or inviting water, it's cold, petrified water in the harsh autumn climate of the steppe. So we start with this harsh background with exotic names like Running Horse Creek. Okay, the second stanza. The second stanza continues the description of this strange land. But it also gives us the time of the year and the time of the expedition. In the 9th month, at Wheel Terrace, the wind howls at night. The creek is full of broken stones, as big as bushels. Blown on the wind, scattered, small stones fly everywhere. So it's autumn. It's the 9th month, which would be mid-autumn in the traditional Chinese calendar, probably October. And we are at this place, Wheel Terrace, another exotic area. I think it's Lun Tai. And what characterizes it, apart from a vast expanse of cold, frozen water and a yellowless, indistinct plain, is the wind. Terrible wind is blowing, much worse than the Chinese cold, slightly cold winds of autumn. This is a howling wind, a screaming wind. And it's a dangerous wind as well. It has pushed big rocks into the river, and it throws small pebbles onto the travelers. So the climate is as harsh as the people who live here. Next stanza, and we're moving from the geography to the ethnography, if you wish, to the situation. Why is the army here? When the Tartar grass turned yellow and their horses fat and sleek, from Gold Mountain their dust and smoke rose in the west. So the great general of Han leads his army west to meet them. So what has happened? The barbarians, Tartars is a general translation for what the original Chinese would have called Xiongnu, which were the adversaries of the Han dynasty. And the name, they no longer existed by the time of the Tang. These enemies would have been Turkic tribes in the time of the Tang dynasty, but still the old name, the Xiongnu, is retained for them as a synecdoche for all barbarians. And this is in the translation Tartar is the common word that in the West is used for these barbarians of Russia and of the northern China. So what has happened? The Tartar grass, the big grass of the plains, remember these barbarian people are nomads who move around with big flocks of livestock and of horses. They've eaten the grass, which is now yellow because it's autumn. Their horses are ready for warfare. And at Gold Mountain, they concentrate, ready for pillaging, for military campaigns against the Chinese. Gold Mountain, the third of the weird geographical landscapes described here after Running Horse Creek and Wheel Terrace. They can be seen from afar. Gold Mountain is covered with dust and smoke. The smoke from the fires, the dust from the horses trampling the mountain, ready for war. In a preventive campaign, the great general of the Han, that is to say, Feng Changqing, leads his army to the west. It says the great general of the Han. Han, remember, is the Han dynasty, but it's also used again as a synecdoche, just as Xiongnu is the perennial word in Chinese history for the barbarians. Han is the perennial word for the Chinese. It's not just the Han dynasty, it's the Chinese. Okay, so in the next stanza we get a view to the army and on the march. We know the campaign started. We're getting this focalization from the more abstract general to the more specific and bound. So the zoom of the camera is focusing on the army and on the general. The general wears his golden armor through the night. At midnight his men march, their spears clashing, the wind like a knife slashing their faces. So this stanza is full of military imagery. First we get the general, and he's a worthy, a hard guy, a tough fighter. He never takes his armor even to sleep, if he sleeps at all. This stanza indicates that the Chinese army is advancing at night, probably to reach their enemy quicker, or maybe to surprise the enemy. So his armor is not taken off from his body, and his men are marching at midnight, their spears clashing. Probably the spears are clashing to help in the dark the soldiers know where they have to step on. And the wind is also like a weapon. We already saw in two previous stanzas that the wind was harsh here. Now it's described as a knife. The wind like a knife slashing their faces, and yet they march on. Next stanza makes the focus continues in describing the army, although now it focuses to the horses, the cavalry, and also to an episode in the general's tent. Both elements, the horses and the tent, explain us or serve to push another environmental hazard of this expedition, not only the harsh wind, but the extreme coldness. Their horses' tails are full of snow, their sweat boiling like steam, then freezing into ice on the manes of these great chargers. As in your tent, you draft a declaration, the ink freezing as you write. So the cavalry is moving onward, and the horses are moving as fast as they can. They're sweating profusely, but it's so bloody cold that the sweat freezes, forming icicles, forming ice in the manes of the horses. In the tent, the general is trying to write a declaration, probably a message, calling the barbarians to surrender. And it's so cold that the liquid ink that is used to write freezes completely. It's like a rock. And finally, the last stanza. When they hear your words, then they will know terror, and dare not come to cross swords with you. We will wait at the west gate for word of your great victory. So the battle doesn't have to take place, or at least Shen imagines it won't be necessary. He says, just by reading the words that the general was trying to write in his tent, the barbarians will be terrified. And meanwhile, in the base camp, Shen and the other members of the entourage will be waiting at the western gate because the general went in the western direction. So they will be waiting on the western gate to greet him as a victor. Yeah, the base in Chinese is Cheshi, at Cheshi at the western gate. So Cheshi means the vehicle troop that was placed in the Turfan base in Xinjiang, modern Xinjiang.